everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD Podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and I am right here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright.
We are, it is so appropriate, our topic for today.
Are you a little sleepy?
Oh, I'm sleepy. I am super sleepy. We are talking about sleep today and, you know, how you can get better at it.
You're right.
Because, my goodness, it plagues, it can, getting good sleep can plague the ADHD. But before we do that, head over to Take Control ADHD, get to know us a bit better, listen to the show on the website, or, of course, please subscribe to our mailing list right there and get an email with the latest episode each week. You can connect with us on Twitter and Facebook at Take Control ADHD and call us. Voicemails 503-664-4ADD.
And it works.
And it now works. Yes.
Gonna throw that in there.
Oh my goodness. We got some calls that and some emails telling us that the phone number had been disconnected, and I don't know what happened, but it works now.
I know what happened.
You do? Do you want to come clean?
Yes.
I think it sounds like it's something that's dirty.
Well, no, it was just so annoying because I spent like probably an hour and a half with Skype and their poor customer service trying to figure out why the phone was disconnected. And at the very end of our conversation, he says, "So are you sure you're calling the right phone number?" Yeah.
Well, that way, because so the phone number was really down. Like there was a problem with it, right?
Well, the voicemail wasn't connected on my
Yes.
end, and so because the voicemail wasn't connected, when this was brought to our attention, somebody was trying to leave a voicemail and it wasn't working, and so that's when they said, it's not working, and so I went to test
by calling the wrong number,
and I'm calling the wrong number instead of 664. I was doing 644, which that is not the phone number.
664.
It will be disconnected if you call 644. See, yeah. I'm going to confuse everybody now.
That's a riot.
But an hour and a half of my life was spent, when it really didn't need to be spent that way.
Oh my goodness. So it is working now. The voicemail is turned on again.
Voicemail is turned on.
That itself is a mystery because the voicemail has been working forever, and then it just stopped. It just was disconnected for some mysterious reason.
There's a little ghost in my electronics because there was another random thing that happened to me where, I have 3 different emails. I have a work email, home email, and then I have this other random email that used to be personal. And all of a sudden, one of those emails were just gone from my phone. And I didn't disconnect it. Yeah, I didn't disconnect it. It was just gone. And so I had to go into the mail settings and reconnect. I mean, it was all there and everything was fine, but it just disappeared. I don't know how it did that.
That's really funny.
I don't know. Weird things are happening. I'm hoping this is it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure isn't there a Mercury retrograde thing going on right now?
Maybe.
I don't really calendar those things, but that should be it. That's your gremlin right there. So anyway, here's hoping that it's all over. You can call us again, and we would love to hear from you. So that's the word 664-4ADD. That's the thing. Okay, so let's talk about sleep. We're still in our self-care series.
We are,
and you get a lot of complaints from your clients dealing with sleep. Yes.
I do. In fact, it's really actually very common, and they want strategies and ideas on how to get better sleep. And it was interesting because when I was preparing for this topic, I was reading this really interesting article, and we'll put it in the show notes from Attitude Magazine. And the gal that wrote the article was saying that up to 50% of children and 80% of adults with ADHD have problems either going to sleep, staying asleep, getting restful sleep, and getting up the next morning. Wow. 80%, Pete.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That is so high and so sad. It means we're all walking around like zombies.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. So I think this is an important topic. It's a big topic.
Yeah. And
so I'm going to actually talk a little bit about, what's happening. And I'm sure that this is not going to be any big surprise for people, kind of the consequences of what happens. But there's one particular strategy that I'm going to really zero in on today, rather than trying to just throw a bunch of them out to people. I want to zero in on one particular one. So
awesome.
That's coming. But yeah, I mean, what happens? I mean, why is this happening? I think for ADHD, people are going to be nodding their heads. They're staying up too late.
Well, yeah, that's the
right.
that's the big one.
That's the big one. You don't even realize what time it is.
Yeah.
You're not paying attention. You're getting your second wind because. Oh, go ahead.
No. I want to. You say second wind. That's the one that play. It's this combination of like feeling like everything's finally silent. Something, in the dark comes around, everybody goes to bed, and suddenly I have a chance. My head kind of clears for a little bit, and that second wind comes on, and that is my curse. Because once that happens, then it doesn't matter what time. I lose all track of time, and suddenly I'm catching up on all the nonsense. I'm writing emails, I'm just producing podcasts. It's just what happens, and then it's 1:00 in the morning.
Well, and that's exactly, it's the cycle of you're trying to catch up from the day because during the day you were tired from staying up so late the night before. I mean, it's a really, nasty cycle. So yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you're just not paying attention to time. Mm-hmm. So I have just a quick little story about my son. So he's 13 and it was a weekend night, thankfully. But he was out in the living room and he was watching TV and he had the dog next to him and he was petting the dog, watching TV. He was on his iPod. I mean, just, doing 13-year-old stuff. And it was about 1:00 in the morning and I had already gone to bed and woke up and realized that the light was still on and he was still in the living room. So go out there, hey son, you got to wrap it up. You got to go to bed, you got to go to sleep. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, mom, no problem. And then I go back to bed. At 2:30 in the morning, I realize the light is still on. I can still hear the TV. I walk out there. I'm like, okay, Jaden, what are you doing? It's 2:30 in the morning. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, he honestly had no clue.
Yeah.
That an hour and a half went by and that it was 2:30 in the morning. He had no idea.
You know what happens to me? It is exactly that and a variation of it. And I'm sure somebody's going to be nodding their head with this one too. You're sitting there and you have a clock sitting right next to whatever you're doing. Maybe you're watching a show, right? And you're binging some. This happens to me when I'm binging some show on Netflix, right? Yeah. And I think to myself, like, time means something different when it's dark out than it does in the light, right? There's nobody waiting on me. Like I can
do whatever I want.
I can do whatever I want. That's exactly right. My mom's not telling me to go to bed. and so I start counting in terms of like, well, I mean, what's the difference between 11:00 and 11:22? Yeah, I'll watch one more episode of this stupid show. Yeah. Well, once it's 11:22, well, it's not even midnight yet. Okay, I'll just watch one more episode. And then, well, okay, now it's only 10 after 12. So like that's nothing. It's barely after midnight. I'll just watch one more, and so you just keep plowing away at making bad decisions for yourself because it's late.
Right. That's right. And there's also something that kind of happens, I think, with really whether people want to acknowledge this or not, it
probably
happens.
Not.
Is they also get to that point where they just don't care because they kind of feel like they're living in the now, right? I mean, you're living in this moment of binge watching, and so it's kind of that point of, you know what? I don't really care. I'm going to watch this, and I'll just deal with however I feel in the morning when the morning comes.
Because the morning at that point is really far away.
It really can be. Yeah. Although it can also come really fast. But I mean, that's something to be aware of that, if you're starting to kind of get to that feeling of, who cares?
Yeah. Right.
You might want to stop for a minute and really think about if you care or not, because you might care more than you think you
care.
do.
But that becomes part of the habit that you need to build is caring.
Yes.
Right. Being aware that you're making a bad decision and then caring about it.
Well, and then the last point I want to bring up, which is something that happens to me a lot with just my overall anxiety, is you go to lay down, you're tired, you are physically tired, but your brain doesn't shut off. You just keep ruminating over the same stuff. And I remember one day, my family is really good about asking each other how we slept the night before. I don't know why. It's just a habit we all do. We ask our children how they slept. My husband always asks me how I slept the night before. And I remember one time telling him I slept awful. It was terrible. And he's like, well, what were you worried about? And I'm like, I don't even know. Like I was worried about everything and nothing all at the same time.
Sure. Oh my goodness. I totally resonate with that. Totally.
And then you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh my gosh, that was not a big deal, but you just can't shut down. So that's also a big, huge issue. So
truly.
Yeah, so we've kind of talked a little bit about this bad cycle. When you go to bed late, it starts the next day off poorly. You're always feeling like you're catching up, you're late, running out the door. Of course, your ADHD is going to get worse because it's going to be harder to focus. It's going to be harder to pay attention. If you're like me, if I'm sleep deprived, I'm going to be cranky. I'm going to be a little more sensitive than I usually am.
Yeah, right.
So people I love most, watch out because I might not be very nice.
Well, and that's it's an interesting thing. Like you end up feeling like you use the words thin-skinned, like I'm sensitive to environmental and emotional responses, but you actually physically feel like your skin is thin.
Yes,
and
yes.
Like you're somehow more fragile in the world.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's a really good way of explaining it. More fragile for sure.
Yeah.
You can be more impulsive. So if that's an issue, your pause button is probably going to be gone that day.
Yeah. Well, for me, that means I always eat more terrible stuff.
Right.
And I probably spend way too much money.
And you go back to that point of, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this right now because it feels good right now.
Right, exactly.
And not think about it. Yeah.
Hello, dopamine push.
Yep, exactly. And then just that general fatigue of just feeling tired. I had a client tell me this week, that, she was just feeling really tired during the day. So we kind of started talking about what was happening. And of course, sleep is an issue, nutrition, all of these things that we're talking about in the self-care series, affects how we go through our day. I mean, it just makes such a difference. Now you're going to see and hear and read a lot of advice out there. And I'm going to have a blog post this week that's going to talk about some of these tips. Exercise, of course, is a big one. We've already talked about that. I thought it was great when Lori brought up last week about the medications, how they can actually help you sleep. And,
right.
That was interesting. But so there's a lot of different tips and things out there. But today, like I was saying, I really want to focus in on one strategy and really dig into this one a little bit more. And that's trying to go to bed at the same time every night. That is something, yes. And it's really, you do this by having a real clear and regular bedtime routine. So that's what I want to talk about is this bedtime routine. Do you have one? I'm just curious.
I do. When I'm at my best, and I think right now, like as we're talking about this, I've been on kind of a bad swing in terms of, making bad decisions over the holidays, eating too much, feeling crummy. And then once you start feeling crummy, it's really hard to make good decisions about what you end up doing. So my routine ends up being really sort of diminishing to my general constitution. So before sort of, let's go back to November, my routine was so great. It was so great. It was something I was so proud of. Mm-hmm. The kids, and the kids are once I'm on a routine, the kids are on a routine. So they end up really, feeling good about going to bed. They get ready for bed around, 7:30, 8 o'clock, and they get in bed and they can read or listen to their audiobooks, and then they're in bed at 9 and they're asleep. And for me, I would just stay on their schedule. So once the kids are in bed, I am brushing my teeth, I am getting in bed, and I'm reading something, right? Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing. Then things fall apart, and I end up getting in bed with my iPad, and I start watching shows, and I end up, it just, once you do that, once it's okay for me to make the bed something that's not about just going to sleep, then my habit falls apart, and I'm up just because I'm in bed. Mm-hmm. If I'm watching TV, I'm not going to sleep. Right.
Oh,
that doesn't count.
Yeah. If you're playing a game on the iPad, you're not going to sleep.
It doesn't count. And you make that count. Like you try to rationalize that to counting. And so
like this is downtime.
Exactly. So for that consistency for me was always, I need to be more on my kids' schedule. If they need more sleep, so do I.
Yes,
and that ends up being, and it makes it so much easier to get up in the morning.
Well, one of the things that I like, what I just heard from you is how you were using your kids' schedule as sort of your cue, as your schedule too. That was a cue for you. Like, okay, now it's me to, now it's my turn. And I think that that's important. And a good tip that if you're going to figure out what your bedtime routine is, if you have children, you can certainly do that as well, as kind of use their routine and build that into yours. Well, and it makes sense to have a bedtime routine, right? I mean, if you look at all the the advice around going to sleep, it totally makes sense, but it isn't always clear for people to know what that routine should be. And consistency, as we've already pointed out, can be a huge thing. So I think to get started, what I would recommend people doing is just to get really clear about what you want your routine to look like for you. And it's not to say that it has to be that way all the time, every, single night, because we're not looking for perfection here. We just want to be as consistent as possible. But just really kind of thinking about what could this look like for me? What do I want? And this is really what I want to emphasize and be clear about is this is not, how do I say this? It's not the entertainment and the chores. So it's not like, this is not the routine of, okay, I've got to get ready for school or work the next day, or I have to pack lunches. What I'm talking about is really that time right before you go to bed.
Okay.
So that might be like an hour before or a half hour. It just depends on how many things you kind of want to put into that downtime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay. So some things to think about, some ideas that aren't related to TV, because we want the TV to be, off. We want the electronic devices to be off. So maybe if you want 8 hours of sleep, for example, you know that you need to be, and you have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you want to be in bed by 10. So you might start your routine like around 9:15. And again, depending on how much you want to put into this, you could meditate for a few minutes, maybe do some yoga if you enjoy doing yoga, write in your gratitude or success journal. These are all ideas that you could be doing that would be winding yourself down. If I think I brought this up when we did the show right after I did that 10-day cleanse, I talked about the lavender bath. I think, I'm not sure, but part of that cleanse that he had me do, that schedule or routine, was taking a lavender bath every day or every evening. And I'm telling you, I slept better during that period of time than I have in a long time. There's something about lavender.
Yeah,
it's really peaceful. So it's those kinds of things. Like, what do you want to do? Do you want to read? But my question to you, Pete, because I think you know more about this than I do. What if your books are on your iPad? I mean, I know you've talked about this a little bit with why you got a Kindle, but that's where I get stuck, is that my books are on my iPad. So I'm not exactly sure. What do you think?
The challenge that the most electronic devices have is that the blue light, and it's the blue light spectrum that activates your brain, right? That turns you on. And so if you're staring at your phone or your iPad in bed, you're going to wake yourself up by the act of reading as you're trying to cool yourself down. And so you want to reduce the that blue light spectrum coming out of the screen and go more for the warmer tones, the yellows and the tones that actually shut you down. Or a device that obviously doesn't give off any of that spectrum light. It's just a dead device, like a Kindle, that's just a dead screen. But there's an interesting thing. I did switch to the Kindle, and for my nighttime reading, and I just keep it by the bed. It doesn't go anywhere with me. All of my Kindle books sync to my iPad, in the Kindle app, so I always know where I am during the day. I can read on my phone or my Kindle is fine. But the point I want to make here is that it looks like our hope is not lost for those who don't want to invest in a Kindle but already have an iPad and already have an iPhone, and they want to read on it at night. Apple is aware of this problem. And so in the next update, iOS 9.3 is coming. In a matter of, I would say, weeks to a month, we will see iOS 9.3. And there is a new technology built into that called Night Shift, where the device will detect where you are, and at sunrise, it will reduce the blue light and increase the warm tone. So your screen, effectively, it starts looking yellow, but after a little while, you realize, oh my goodness, it's very soothing. I can look at it. You can already get it on a developer beta. I've looked at it. It's remarkable. The experience is, as you're testing it, after an hour or so, you're like, wow, it's really yellow. I'm going to turn on the blue light again, and it's like laser beams are shooting into your face.
I bet it is.
So there is hope. For me, the routine is, I tend to go for the Kindle because I don't want to worry about the devices, and I don't want to be distracted by other notifications that are on the iPad at night.
Right,
and that actually may be a bigger case for actually just reading a book or a magazine. The other thing I would add is that you don't read anything related to your day job, right? Or your work, right?
Or news. I've heard about news. Yeah.
Read fiction. Read something gentle or fantasy or something that's going to plant a seed in your brain for great dreams. That's kind of what I'm shooting for is what can I read that'll give me the most awesome dream?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Just free me from thinking about work. That's what you want to do is get that out of your head.
Yeah.
So,
what was the app? Was it the Calm app that you were talking about a while back that had the sleeping meditation?
There were a couple. There was Buddhify, and that was one of them. And there was Calm was one of them. It was I think it was Buddhify that had the cycles, right? It had
right. Okay.
It has the rings, and that ends up being a really fun kind of an alternative.
We'll have to put that back in the show notes just for people to look at if you're looking for meditation as part of your routine, because those are specific to sleep, so they might help you fall asleep.
Yes. And there are 6 in Buddhify. There are 6 specific meditations. They're all between 7 and 12 minutes that actually are specifically targeted toward, I can't sleep right now. I need to listen to this. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So there's different, as we've said, there's different ideas of how you can make your routine, or what you can make your routine look like, what you can do, what kinds of things would relax you. But I think that the biggest thing especially with ADHD, is we have to remember to do the routine, right? Yeah. You can't forget. And if you don't have reminders or some kind of structure around that time, you are going to forget, because you're not going to necessarily be paying attention to the time. So going back to that schedule of, if you want to be in bed by 10, my recommendation is that you set a few alarms before the 10 o'clock hour. So at 9 o'clock, the alarm, goes off and it says, time to get ready for bed. And then again at 9:30, and then again at 9:45, and then again at 5 to 10, or at 10 o'clock, whatever you prefer. And you can set these times however you want them to be set. But the point is just to keep reminding you, okay, here we are. Here's the passing of time. Now it's 15 minutes. Okay, here you are, only 10 minutes until 10. Where are you? So you can kind of determine, okay, what do I need to adjust here? Because of course it's not a perfect system. I mean, you're not going to be doing the same thing every night at the same time. Ideally, that would be great, but realistically, we know that's not always the case.
I would just add that one of the challenges I had when I was first trying to adjust last, 2 years ago, when I was really working to adjust my sleep, is that I would say, okay, if I want 8 hours, I want to be in bed by 10. But that ended up being a challenge for me, because being in bed by 10 is different from being asleep by 10. If I want 8 hours of sleep, I need to be asleep at 10.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I actually needed to start my routine and be in bed reading at like 9:30, depending on how long it would take me to actually fall asleep. So if you're making bad decisions and you actually don't have trouble falling asleep, just be in bed by 9:50 and turn the lights out at 9:50 so that you're asleep in 10 minutes. If you have trouble going to sleep, you may need to be in bed at 9:30 or 9:15 and reading and really slowing yourself down, smelling a lavender candle. Like, those are the kinds of things that you may need to think about if your goal is 8 hours of sleep. And that was for me.
I think that's a great point. And that really leads into how to be consistent with this is to practice it. And I think that's exactly what you're suggesting, is that you have to kind of practice with the time a little bit. And how long does it take you to fall asleep? And when do you need to start this bedtime routine? For some of you, it might be an hour and a half. For some of you, it may only be a half hour. I mean, it really just depends.
Right.
So I love that. I mean, you want to practice it. And I think that that's how you do become more consistent with it, is if you're going into it with, this is my intention for this week, I'm going to really work hard on this bedtime routine. I'm going to really be conscious about it, really be aware of it. I'm going to tell, whoever I live with, whether it's your spouse or partner or whatever, roommate, these are my intentions. Can you help me with this? Because the accountability can be really helpful if you have that available to you. And just really go into it as okay, let's just see what happens. Did I sleep better that night? And taking one thing at a time. And we've talked about this a lot with habits and when you're trying to make any kind of change. You may want at some point to meditate and write in your success journal and take a lavender bath. but all three of those things consistently may not all happen at once. So pick one. Maybe it's just meditating for 5 minutes before you go to bed. Or maybe it's just the simple fact that you're going to turn electronics off at 9 o'clock. Just practice that alone, right?
I have a friend who actually has it set so his Wi-Fi, his home Wi-Fi device actually is on a timer, an outlet timer, and at 9 o'clock, their house Wi-Fi, it's not like just access is off or devices can't connect. The power to the device is shut off. So there is no electronic field in his house. And that's, he happens to live kind of apart from other people. There's no cross signal. Where I live, there's always Wi-Fi in my house. It may not be mine, but I can't just shut it off. But that is, maybe you consider not charging your phone or your iPad by your bed if you're one of those folks.
Yes.
Leave it in another room, or if you use your phone as your alarm, make sure it's in airplane mode overnight.
Right.
So I do have a question for you, because one of the things that I always hear from people whenever I talk about sleep is, I could absolutely never possibly change my sleep schedule because I'm such a night person. And oh my goodness, I'm such a morning person. My experience is, though, that's not a real thing. It's something we like to say about ourselves, but what it really means is you have a cortisol disorder and you are chemically imbalanced, and you can adjust that to be whoever you want to be by just some of these habits. But do you have any experience with this?
Well, first of all, I think whenever you say that phrase, I can never, then you're really in trouble.
Right.
Yeah, because you probably never will, if you really believe that you can't. I don't think it's probably realistic to think that somebody that usually goes to bed at midnight is going to all of a sudden go to bed at 9. So I think that, you probably do need to set the expectations to be realistic for you. I think you probably have to work in smaller increments of time. If you go to bed at midnight, try to go to bed at 11:45, try to go to bed at 11:30. Don't just shoot for 9 o'clock right out the gate. Mm-hmm. So I think you got to be realistic. So a couple things. One, I think you got to change your belief, your limiting belief to something that serves you, that you really do want to have happen and can believe that it can happen. And then I think it's working small, backwards. A lot of it has to do with the rhythm.
Circadian rhythms get thrown off.
Thank you. Yes, that's what it is. It's that rhythm. And so that's what's happening with ADHD, is your rhythm is constantly off. Can it be adjusted? Well, because when you go to the East Coast, you can adjust with that 3-hour difference.
Exactly.
If you go to Italy, and I don't even know what the difference, that hour difference is in Italy. I'm just going to say 10 hours. So you do adjust, eventually. It may take you a few days, but you do get onto that time schedule. So I think it's possible. Yeah.
Well, I think it is too. And I think, part of the fight is recognizing that we build these assumptions about ourselves in a period where, there is no choice but to fall in line with those assumptions. Like, in my experience, people who say, I'm such a late night person, right? I don't get my second wind until 11 o'clock, and then I work till. Well, that was because you may have adapted to a schedule in college when you were living in a dorm and you had no choice, because it was just too crazy at all of the periods. But if you really want to, the best sleep that you will get, any given night is really before midnight, right? The earlier you get to sleep, the better sleep you're going to have. Wake up in the morning and get your work done, get your chores done, the things that you normally would do in the evening. If it's getting too late, leave the dishes in the dishwasher and get at them at 6 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning. You'll generally feel better. I have a friend who was really trying to tackle this, and he said, I knew I was staying up too late, and so I just started setting my alarm for like 5:30 in the morning, and I would go to bed at 1. I'd wake up at 5:30, and I would feel terrible. But you can be darn sure that by 9 o'clock that night, I was ready to go to bed. And he was able to start changing his behavior and forcing it a little bit. You can get it in control. You can make changes in when you are most productive and when you're most active. You just have to want to.
You have to want to, and I think you've got to set the intention. I mean, when we talk about strategies, about anything with ADHD, if there's something you really want to change, then you've got to really start paying attention to it. So, I think that the first thing is you got to figure out what is the problem. Is sleeping. Okay, that's the problem. So here's a strategy, is this bedtime routine. You've got to start paying attention to it. And you have to put these alarms and these accountability structures, and you got to, really be clear about your routine and practice it and be committed to it. And then you'll start to see the differences. You'll start to see the benefits. You'll start to see how important it is, and you'll want to continue it. And then you can add, a little bit more to it if you need to. And maybe you don't. Maybe just shutting off the electronics at 9 o'clock is good enough because you're getting better sleep now. Maybe that's all you have to do.
Right.
But I think that, going back to those limiting beliefs, if you think that you're always just going to be a night person and you don't try to do anything differently, then you're just going to continue with the same pattern. I mean, it is just, that's the way it is. So, if you want this to change, you got to just be really intentional, pay attention, and try. Got to try.
Right.
See what happens.
I love it.
There you go.
Oh, you know what else? It's okay to nap. Can we end on that? It's okay to nap. You have permission to nap.
I know. And that is hard because, and it just, this is personal experience. It's hard to nap because you feel guilty.
Yes.
You feel like you shouldn't. But yes, I've read that too, where it's like you want to have that little, but it's like a 10 to 20 minute nap. It's not the 2-hour nap.
Right.
You don't want the long naps because then that again will screw up your cycles. But
I saw a thing on Discovery Channel that was historically, Discovery Channel these days is, well, it's Discovery Channel. It's basically historical soap opera. But historically, my understanding is that it used to be we would sleep twice every day. We would sleep for a few hours in the middle of the night, and then we would wake up and we would do the nighttime chores. And then we would go back to sleep and sleep a few hours in the middle of the day. And so you'd end up with sort of that midnight is the chore time, and then again noon is the chore time, and so in the Middle Ages there would be sort of 2 cycles of sleep if you were kind of a villager. So I find that really interesting, and I think we ended up sleeping. Knowing that there's just believing that there's just one appropriate time for sleep as a result of a lot of different cultural forces and modernization, but it's okay to sleep when you're tired. I think is the rule, and villagers knew this.
Well, because you are more productive, and that's what I find, and I have the luxury of working from home, so I realize that's I'm pretty fortunate. I do know that there's more places that are doing these little nap rooms now, which is kind of cool. But,
I know, I love that.
But yeah, it is interesting when you start to get kind of tired and you feel like, okay, I'm not producing, I'm not writing what I want to write, I'm not being creative or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
You go and you take that little nap, and it can definitely make a big difference. But so can exercise too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is that even if you can't nap, even just going outside, I mean, we've talked about this before, going outside and just taking a few deep breaths in the fresh air can really make you a little bit more awake and
absolutely, and
feel more energized. So good stuff, Pete.
I feel like that was a false ending before. I apologize for that, but now we're really done.
We're done.
All right. This was great. I love talking about sleep. It makes me sleepy. I'm ready to go to bed.
Well, and I want to hear from people too. Like what do you guys do? What are your strategies? What works for you? Because I think that the community of ADDers are going to want to know, because this is obviously an 80% of the ADHD population has this issue. So it's a big deal. So if you have anything to share, please do.
Absolutely. Once again, jump on the Facebook page. That tends to be where most of the comments happen. But call us. Leave us a voicemail. Again, 503-664-4ADD. Tell us how you sleep. We want to hear it. We'll put it on the show. Thanks, everybody. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next week on Taking Control, the ADHD Podcast.